Greetings to my fellow peace blunderers, and today we're talking Endgames again, introducing a magnificent idea into your endgame arsenal, which is the Decoy sacrifice. On a side note, I'm so excited to be talking to you guys again and making videos. I am back from the tournament, and that means that the video analyses of my games from the tournament, the Cracovia 2022, will start coming out very soon. And I will be hosting a massively exciting celebratory chess tournament on chess.com commemorating our common achievement of 10,000 subs. Much love. If you guys want to participate, then feel free to join the club. The link will be in the description. Join our club on chess.com. The tournament is happening this Sunday, January 8th. 6 p.m. UTC, you don't want to miss it. Anyway, enough with the announcements. I'm back on the analysis board where we can clearly see that white is trying to win by promoting the H-pawn. The only problem that stands in white's way is of course the E6 black knight, and this is where white has to be really careful because, for example, if white is trying to play something like H5, well, this is terrible news. White can start reaching for the napkins because here comes knight f4 with check, and then no matter where you go with the king, you can go to g5, for example. Knight will just simply sacrifice itself for the pawn, and this will be a draw. So before I even get to the main point, what are the minor first takeaways that we can get from this is that when you're trying to promote your pawn, and this is your only pawn, you've got to always be extra careful and make sure that the opponent cannot sacrifice his piece for that pawn, causing a draw. Especially you've got to be careful when you're dealing with knights because of course knights are much trickier and their forks are sometimes much easier to miss. Okay, so we have established that pushing the pawn right away with h5 does not work, we're just losing the pawn. We need to instead address the annoying defender in the knight on e6. We need to figure out how we can get that pesky knight away from that square so we can safely promote that pawn. And as some of you may have guessed by the title, the way we're going to do that is going to be spectacular. We're going to do that with a classy knight d4 check, forking the e6 knight and the opponent king. The only logical way for black to continue is going to be to capture the knight. If black does not capture the knight and just moves their king away to some other square, which is going to capture knight on e6 and win even easier. So capturing knight is the only way really for black to proceed. And this is what we call a decoy sacrifice. It's a typical example of a decoy sacrifice. A decoy sacrifice is basically when you sacrifice some of your material. In that case, we sacrificed a whole knight to divert your opponent's attention, to get their pieces away from the action, away from a place where you want to proceed, where you want to do something. The knight on e6 was very annoying and stopping us from promoting, but on d4, it's not as scary. Now, the concept of a decoy sacrifice can be applicable at any stage of the game, but in the endgame, it's especially critical because in the endgame, mostly what you're looking to do is to promote your pawn and make a queen. As long as you get to make a queen and win, it doesn't matter how much other material that you've got, you sacrifice along the way. Feel free to sacrifice a knight, a bishop, or rook, as long as you get your goal. Okay, so back to the example. We have just made the knight go away from e6. Let's, before we push the pawn, make sure that the knight cannot go back to e6 immediately with a clever king f6. Now we're depriving the knight from both e6 and f5, and as you can see with the diagonal arrow that I drew, it's very important, generally, when you're dealing with knights in the endgames, to keep your king away 2 squares diagonally from the knight. With this kind of setup, 2 squares diagonally away from each other, you're achieving 2 things at the same time. The first thing, if you know basic chess geometry, you're making sure that your king will not be checked by the knight anytime soon, as long as it stays in place. For example, when you've got this setup, it's going to take a minimum of 3 moves for the knight to even threaten the king. For example, something like knight f3, knight d2, knight e4. or knight b3, knight c5, knight d7 to threaten the king from both squares. I know, that's too many arrows, I'm sorry. And I think number 2, and arguably the more important one in this position, is that, as I said, you're depriving the knight of some of the really, really important squares. And in this position, for black, what do you even do? The king is absolutely irrelevant to the position. It's nowhere near enough to catch the pawn. That's why moving the king is not going to improve your position whatsoever. That's why you've got to think of something with the knight. Okay, let's try and find a move for a knight. Let's try maybe knight c2, trying to redirect the knight, maybe so that it can become relevant again through e3, g4 perhaps? We'll see. h5, pushing, trying to promote. Knight e3, as I told you, and now again, very careful, very careful. A misstep like h6 is going to be trouble, because knight g4 check, you lose your pawn and it's going to be a draw. So how about we don't let the black knight have the g4 square? What about we remember the setup I was showing you just a minute ago and play king g5, achieving the same 2 square diagonally distance that was there just a couple of moves ago. Now the knight again has got no checks, no availability of the g4 and the f5 squares. Well, okay, fine. Knight d5, I guess, the only square that makes sense. But even from d5, where it does seem that the knight can maybe affect something, because it seems like it's just maybe close enough, it's actually not close enough at all. We can now promote without any more gimmicks. h6, knight e7 trying to get even closer, but again, not close enough, because after h7, the knight does not have g6, the knight does not have g8, and the knight has to go back to d5 to just, stand and watch how we're going to queen and subsequently win. Now coming back to our original position, to be fair, knight d4 check, the decoy sacrifice that we played, is not the only winning move. Alright, this is not the only method that we can queen this pawn without losing it. However, I still strongly recommend playing knight d4 here as the decoy sacrifice, because 1, it is the quickest and the easiest win, and 2, it just looks cool, doesn't it? If you play something like, I don't know, king f6, trying to attack the knight with the king, it's still winning, it's still alright, but you can end up just walking in circles. For example, knight f4, and then king g5, attacking the knight again, and then we have knight e6 check, and then after maybe king g6, we have come back to the original position. Or, again, let's try king f6, attacking the knight again, the knight goes again to f4, and now instead of king g5 that we just tried, let's try king f5, for example, attacking the knight, but now knight h5, blocking the pawn from ever advancing, king g5 attacking, knight g7, and now the pawn cannot advance again because the pawn is just going to get captured and there's going to be a forced draw. So king g6, getting the knight away yet again, knight e6, and we're circled back to the original position another time. So always keep your eyes peeled for a decoy sacrifice, and of course calculate it. A sacrifice is only as good as its calculation. The idea, the intention can be commendable, but if it doesn't work, if it's not calculated properly, what's the point? Please make sure that you calculate through the variations that can happen after you've sacrificed material, all right? In this position, I'm just showing you that you can do that you should be aware of this concept, but it doesn't mean that you have to do it every time you think it works. You need to make sure it works. So yeah, always keep your eyes peeled for a decoy sacrifice when you have an annoying defender of your opponent that you're dealing with and you need to get it away somehow from some of the important squares. This is the way to go. Remember, it doesn't matter most of the time how much material you sacrifice as long as you're getting that queen. So yeah, if you just so happened to find this video useful, please like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitch. I stream Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Now that I'm back from the tournament, I will be back streaming shortly. Find me on chess.com, join our Discord, all that good stuff. And I'll be talking to you very soon, my favorite unintentional gambiteers. Love you guys. See ya in the next one.